Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Ruppert Matthews, and we're going to be talking about his, newest book, Mysterious Yorkshire. And when I originally contacted him, I was planning on talking to him about Roswell, because he's done some investigation into that, and at the time I was totally unaware he had this new book out, so I changed my mind, decided to talk to him about his new book, and then maybe we could do a little bit about Roswell as well, see what we could squeeze in here. And I'm going to let him, tell you a little something about himself and how he got interested in writing about, paranormal, related topics and, what his interest is here. So you'll have a little idea who we're talking to. Before we get into that, however, I want to make sure I get it out there that his website is www.ruppertmatthews.com, and you can click on it in the show description right below. In addition to that, I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the chat room, but it won't be clickable. And for anybody that's listening at Shoutcast or YouTube or somewhere else, if you want to join the show live, just come to www.paranormalpalace.com. If you click on the receive newsletter button in the, profile, when you sign up, it's a free account. You can also get my newsletter usually sent out twice a week, and I usually send out reminders twice a week, sometimes more often if I have, busier weeks than others, like during conference season. That way you can always stay up to date. And it also lets you into the chat room, which is totally free. I don't charge for access to the show or anything like that. The main thing I try to do is keep the spam bots out, because people don't want, people being rude or anything in the chat room, and I try to protect you from that as best I can. So, Ruppert, how are you doing today?
Yeah, we're doing well. Have a very busy day today.
I can understand that. I understand when I called earlier to make sure I had your number right in Skype, I kind of caught you away from the house so I could tell you were busy.
Yeah, we were doing a big book launch up in London today. So I live in England, and I earn a living as editorial director at a publishing company. We're doing a launch of one of our new books up in London today, so it's been all go.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think you do have a publishing company, don't you, if I'm not mistaken, or...
Yeah, it's just, we're only small. We're called Brett Wilder, so it's brettwilderbooks.com. We only publish about 25, 30 books a year, but, we concentrate on doing a lot of history and paranormal stuff, so we're quite good. We enjoy ourselves.
Well, right now, we got a listener in the chat room. He was last night's guest, and he's the author of Mysteries of the Multiverse and Mind. And if I remember correctly, I think he's right here in America, and he might actually may or may not be interested in the fact that you do publish a few books, and he may want to connect with you. Maybe, I don't know. I can't speak for him.
Yeah.
But, I figure it's out there listening.
If anyone wants to get in touch with us, it's info@brettwilderbooks.com, and you spell Brett Wilder, BRETWALDA, okay? And we're interested to hear from anyone.
Okay. And that's also posted on your regular website as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on the show and, spending your time and sharing all this with us. It's a pleasure to have you here. But to get the ball rolling, why don't you tell everybody kind of what got you interested in writing about paranormal phenomena, because I believe you were originally just a journalist. You weren't always into paranormal, were you?
Yeah, no, that's right. I used to work for one of our national daily papers here in England called the Daily Mail. But I've been interested in history, so history is my first thing. But in my family, we've had a tradition of having second sight, yeah? And then about, let's think, 12 years ago, one of the publishers that I write history books for was, I sort of, we went down to lunch, he was having a little complaint to me, and he was saying that he didn't know anyone who could write anything about ghosts and hauntings and things. I sort of had a little bit of an interest in it. I said I'd take it on. So I did that book, like I said, that was about 12 years ago. And that sold very well here in the UK. It was a book about haunted places in Kent, which is one of the counties that we have here. And on the back of that, I started writing other books and doing newspaper columns, and I've got a TV series here in the UK. And it's just sort of snowballed from there. So although officially I'm a historian and I write history books, I'm spending, a third, half my time doing paranormal stuff. And it's really interesting.
Oh, I got to tell you, I got into this years ago. And I mean, just with the information on the internet alone, you could spend hours a day, day in and day out, researching this stuff. I mean, the information out there is just huge.
Oh, there is. There's an enormous amount. But I mean, what I find when I'm researching the books that I do here, there's absolutely there's nothing like going to the place, talking to the people who live there, finding out what their experiences are, or sometimes aren't. I mean, more than once I've gone to a place that is supposed to have a very active ghost. It's supposed to be haunted. But when you get there and you talk to the people, and they all say, no one's seen the ghost for 50 years. It doesn't exist anymore.
Well, I was just looking in the chat room while you were talking, and that author I told you about was reminding me he lives in Florida. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. I knew that last night, and I done forgot it by this morning. You know that old saying, I slept since then? There must be something to that.
That's right, because down in Florida, that's where they've got the skunk ape, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I've read a lot about that. Now, I don't know what you know about it, but
I've done some research into cryptozoology, because over here in England, we've got reports of pumas running around near where I live, and of course up in Scotland, which is 400 miles from here, we've got the Loch Ness monster and the Morag monster and a couple of things like that. So I've done a fair bit on cryptozoology. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, wasn't the skunk ape that you're talking about in Florida? Wasn't that Florida's version of Bigfoot? Well,
sort of, but very, very different actually, because you look at Bigfoot, that's supposed to be like a hominid ape, so it walks upright on two legs like we do. If you look at its footprints, it's a bit like a human print. It's got a heel, it's got a ball on its foot, it's got 5 toes and a big toe. Yeah, but if you look at the skunk ape, the footprints that leaves behind is more like maybe a chimpanzee's foot. So the footprint the skunk ape's got is more like a human hand, and it doesn't always walk on 2 legs. Sometimes it's walking on 4 legs and so on. So it's less like a human and more like a chimpanzee. So it's a different sort of animal, I think.
Okay, yeah, that's very possible. Because not only do you have the skunk ape, you have the chupacabra as well, and I think some people have mistaken that for extraterrestrial, and nobody's 100% sure exactly what that is.
Well, that's right. I think the problem you've got there is that you haven't got enough good quality sightings to be absolutely sure what you're talking about. A lot of the sightings you've got there, they're in poor light conditions. They're at quite a distance. They're very short distance sightings. They don't last very long. Whereas when you're looking at something like Bigfoot or, over here on our side of the Atlantic, the Loch Ness monster, you're dealing with sightings that are at close range, maybe only 40, 50 yards away. They're in good light conditions, not twilight and thing, middle of the day. And the witness, has the object in view for 3, 4, 5 minutes. So with that sort of thing, you're getting really good quality sightings. You can get a really good description of what it is the person saw. Whereas, with some of these other things, like, say, the chupacabra, it's not such a good sighting. It's really difficult to tell what you're dealing with, or indeed if it's paranormal at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that, and a lot of people, they tend to read more into it than what's there because it's just such a I guess, an exciting moment that they get carried away.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, this is something I've come across a lot with interviewing people who have seen, cryptids or ghosts or, had any sort of really unusual experience, UFOs or whatever, is that for the first 30 seconds, they just are amazed at what they're seeing, that they don't really take in the details. And so, what I found, particularly, it must say, with UFO sightings in this country, that unless the sighting lasts for more than maybe 30, 40 seconds, you're not getting a good description. All you're getting is, hey, it was really bright, and it flew really fast, and it did weird things. And that's all you get, unless the object is in sight for longer than that, people don't get over their initial surprise. You've got to let, the witness that's useful, that gives you a really clear description, is the one that's seen something for longer than maybe 30 or 40 seconds. And then they get over their initial shock and they can start actually looking at it and saying, well, yeah, okay, I think that's 40 feet wide, I think it's a sort of yellowish orange colour, and they can give you a good description.
Right. Well, listen, your new book out, Mysterious Yorkshire, covers a lot of the things that we're talking about, if I'm not mistaken, only as they pertain to Yorkshire, and I'm not familiar with Yorkshire. So why don't you tell us a little something about the book and about Yorkshire?
Okay. Well, Yorkshire is one of our counties here in England. It's in northern England. It's our biggest county. So it, mind you, in terms of America, I suppose it'd be quite small. It's maybe about Massachusetts, which here is quite big, but, obviously it's nothing like as large as Texas. It's a very active community. So you've got a couple of big towns. You've got Leeds and you've got Bradford. But other than that, you've got rural villages where farming and keeping dairy cattle, big business. You've got a large area of upland territory, which I suppose covers maybe a third of the county. And up there, people keep sheep and they run sheep farms and so on. And it's very sparsely populated. But Yorkshire goes back a long way. I mean, Yorkshire as an entity goes back to Viking days, so that's about 1,200 years ago. But people have been living in Yorkshire for 15,000, 20,000 years. And some of the stuff that I cover in Yorkshire, some of the mysteries that they have up there are to do with those really old monuments we've got standing stones. I mean, some of your listeners may have heard of Stonehenge, yeah? That's in southern England, in Yorkshire, but although Stonehenge is famous and it's got a lot of standing stones, the biggest standing stone of all stands in Yorkshire, and it's just a single, huge, massive boulder of granite, and it stands about 50 feet high and about 8 foot wide and so on, and that just stands here just outside a village up in Yorkshire. I've been there for 12,000 years, I think, 10,000 years. No one knows what it's for. So, that's, if you like, the oldest mystery that I've put into the book.
It would seem to me from your description of 8 feet wide and 50 foot tall, like this thing would be top heavy and likely to fall over.
Well, yeah, but there's apparently about 8 feet of it below ground, so, it's been sunk well into the ground. So there's good solid foundations there.
So somebody evidently went to a lot of trouble to plant a huge stone into the ground and stand it upright, and now we're left to figure out why.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, a minute ago when you were talking, I noticed you were breaking up a little bit, and I was wondering, are you aware of any trouble with your phone line by any chance?
Not that I'm aware, no.
Maybe if you move away or turn your head a little bit, it may drift off and sound like it's breaking up. But I just thought I would point that out just in case.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll lean forwards a little bit so I'm not pulling the wire. How's that?
Okay, that may be what it was, because you never can tell.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, sorry, just continuing on Mysterious Yorkshire, because I'm trying to think, might mean something over in the States. Hood?
It's hard to tell for sure. I mean, technology is... It's got so many places it goes through that it's hard to be certain of anything.
That's true. Listen, we've done that big movie of Robin Hood just last year with Russell Crowe in it, yeah?
Robin Hood. I think I've heard of that movie. Was that one you did, or?
No, it's made over in America, but Robin Hood is one of the characters that's in this book on Mysterious Yorkshire.
Oh, okay.
He was meant to live in Sherwood Forest, which is partly in Yorkshire and partly in Nottinghamshire. But in Yorkshire is where you've got Robin Hood's Well, which is like a natural spring of fresh water. And that's where he was meant to go for a drink of water and so on. And it's a big thing there. It's in a village, and they've got the well, and they've got a museum next door. And if you go to the pub, what do you call a pub? Like a bar where you can buy beer. Yeah. And they've got like Robin Hood's hat and Robin Hood's long bow. It's great.
So basically, there's a lot of history about Robin Hood in both places, then, isn't there?
Well, that's right, yeah. But also this book, Mysterious Yorkshire, it's not just about history. There's ghosts, and there's flying saucers, and all sorts of things in it. Because you were saying earlier about Roswell, which is your side of the Atlantic.
Yes.
Yeah. Because I did, as I'm sure you know, your listeners may not, I wrote a book about Roswell about 4 or 5 years ago now, which was published in this country, and I think we called it Roswell, but over in America I think it was called Roswell in Area 51. I think that's what they called it.
It could have been, which has been a lot of people wrote about Area 51, but I don't think many of them connected Roswell and Area 51, did they?
Not really, no. Where it sort of comes into the story is that back in the 50s and 60s, when these stories about crashed UFOs first started coming out, one of the stories was that where did they take the wreckage? Where did they take the bodies of aliens and so on? At the start, they were talking about Wright-Patterson, but then I think later on, towards the end of the 60s. Stories started to surface about things over Area 51, and that might be where they were taking things.
Yeah, that's a very good possibility. A lot of people were saying they took them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, but, I don't think they could have left it at a open, easy-to-get-to facility, for a long period of time. You would think they would have had to move it to somewhere more secure from prying eyes, like Groom Lake, wouldn't you?
Well, I'd have thought so, yeah. I'm not assuming that, there were crashed UFOs in the first place. But yeah, because like Patterson, if you go back to the 50s, it was, it was pretty top secret. People didn't have easy access to it. But you're right, by the time you get into the 1960s, it's a lot more easy access there. And assuming that the USAF or the US government had things that they were trying to hide, they'd be taking them somewhere a lot more secret and somewhere that people just couldn't get access to.
Well, yeah, and you couldn't really blame them. The thing is, though, because they do take them to such, secure places, nobody's actually been able to prove anything definitively, at least to my knowledge as of yet, other than what you get from various whistleblowers. And I'm pretty sure that's what you found.
Yeah, and even with the whistleblowers, because the US government has got this policy of just not commenting and not saying. You can't even tell whether the whistleblowers are telling the truth or not. Because they've got, any government, your government, our government, governments have got so much to hide that it's a lot easier just to say, no comment, we're not talking about that, there's nothing here, let's get on to the next story.
Let's blow it off, sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, and you do wonder whether actually, sometimes it's easier for them to try and put up like a smokescreen about UFOs and so on, so that they don't have to talk about what's really going on in these places, which might be secret weapons or surveillance and, stuff like that.
Right. And, I think it was Nick Redfern recently came out with a book about that I read about, all the places. It was titled Keep Out. That's what I was trying to think of.
Yeah, that's
and it covered all the installations over in England, in your neck of the woods, and over here that, the government officials do not want everybody, knowing everything about it.
Well, that's right. I think one of the places he's talking about is Rudloe Manor, which is about 80 miles from where I'm sitting. It's down in Wiltshire. And during the Second World War, because over here we had, the German bombers coming over and dropping bombs on us. And we know that under Rudloe Manor, they built a lot of tunnels down, because it was sandstone, which is fairly easy to drill through. And they built, we know, something like 40 or 50 miles of tunnels underneath Rudloe, which was where they were storing all our archives, all the government archives, our art treasures, sculptures, paintings, all that sort of stuff, was all stored down there. So it was safe from the German bombers during the war from 1939 to 1945. Then obviously once the war was over, we took up all the paintings and stuff, and that went back to the museums. And then the Ministry of Defence put it up for sale, and about, within a week, it was very quick, the government pulled it and said, no, it's not for sale, we've got a use for it, we're going to use it for something else. And that was in 1948, 1949, so it's about the time that Roswell happened. And since then, no news. They have absolutely refused to let anybody there. They've absolutely refused to announce anything about what's going on. And, even people that are in the armed services, people in the Air Force, people in the Army, they're saying they're not allowed to go there. Their commanders aren't allowed to go there. You're only allowed to go there if you've got top security clearance. So what on earth is going on down at Rudloe? Nobody knows.
I'm not sure, but I think that was one of the places he mentioned in his book, too.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so you've read the book.
Quite a lot of research.
Okay, well, yeah, I can imagine you have. I imagine you both do. I imagine you and Nick probably know each other.
Well, I just said we met. I wouldn't say we know each other, but yeah, when you're in the same sort of business, your paths cross and you meet at things and so on. But Nick's done a lot more research into that sort of thing than I have, and he's a lot more okay with it. Because, my interest, it must be said, he's more into cryptozoology and ghosts and things. And UFOs is something I've looked into, but it's not really my burning passion, if you like, yeah?
Yeah. I think you're both just great, to be honest with you. And you both write a lot of books. You help people get really informed about what's going on. And, you try to avoid a lot of the propaganda that so many people are going for. And that's what I look for when I try to get a guest, is the people that, they're just going to tell it like it is. They're not going to try to dress it up and, just sort of sell more, in other words.
Well, yeah, it's a difficult path to tread because, publishers and so on, they're always trying to put pressure on you to come up with a new idea and to come up with something dramatic, which you can help sell books and, get you publicity and so on. But I think you're right, because, what you've got to do is you've got to look at the evidence, you've got to analyse the evidence, you've got to think, what's really going on here. And there are some writers, I'm not going to name names because it's not fair, but, have a particular theory, and they try and fit the facts to the theory that they're trying to sell.
Oh, yeah, that happens in everything.
Yeah, and what I deliberately try and do with my books is I say, well, look, I'm going to give all the facts, and then I'm going to say, right, some people think this is the explanation, other people think something else is the explanation, and then leave it up to the reader, because obviously I have my own views, but, I'm not in the business of trying to convince people. I'm in the business of saying, these are the facts, now, how do you explain them? Yeah?
There are other people that's like you. Nick is like you on that.
Yeah.
Nick Pope, I think, is also like you. There's other writers that they want to put out there and put the facts. They don't mind saying, it seems to me, I would think, but they also point out when they're doing it, like, hey, that's not the only possibility. I'm just telling you what seems likely to me when they do it. But they're basically trying to, get, what you're trying to do is get people to, think for themselves and come up with their own views and give us something to talk about and put on the table, I think.
Well, that's a lot more interesting way to approach it, because, if we knew what the answer was to these things, they wouldn't be the paranormal. They'd just be normal things like lightning or earthquakes, The fact that they're paranormal means that nobody really knows what the explanation is. And so, what's nice is to look at the evidence, try and categorise it and say, okay, so, you're looking at UFO sightings. Is there anything they all share in common? Or is it things that make one UFO sighting completely different to another one? Are we talking about perhaps the same unexplained phenomena that's causing everything? Or are there different things going on? Because you may well be in the situation where you look at it and say, it's a UFO. But in actual fact, you might be dealing with perhaps 2 or 3 completely different sorts of phenomenon that are producing lights in the sky, that are producing objects that appear to fly and so on. And so we might be dealing with perhaps 2 or 3 different explanations for what we think is one object. Right.
And, that's what I call, in my opinion, true journalism, the way you do that. And I think it's great. And, so many people have slipped away from it in favor of propaganda. It's good to see people that haven't.
Yeah, but, propaganda's got its place. Because if it wasn't for people who were pushing their view, these views wouldn't get out and about. I mean, over in this country, we've got a chap called David Icke.
I'm very familiar with him. Matter of fact, I'd like to get him on my show. I mean, I think he goes a bit far with the, people morphing into lizards, but the man's got some fantastic research, in my opinion.
Well, this is, again, he has got a huge amount of documentation. He's got a lot of eyewitness accounts. And like you say, his thing is about the reptiloids. But a lot of the research he does isn't just into reptiloids. He does a lot of research into government cover-ups. He does a lot of research into secret government research programs, which is all very interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot there that needs looking at. And the fact that, his view is that there are these reptiloids that are dealing with it, that are sort of manipulating everything behind the scenes. If he wasn't pushing that, if he wasn't single-minded enough to go for it, he wouldn't have done all the research that goes along with it and which helps us perhaps understand other things. So, I take my view. My view is we set the facts out and we leave it up to the reader to make their own decision. But if it wasn't for propagandists and, and people who were very single-minded about it, a lot of this stuff wouldn't be uncovered in the first place because, I've got a wife, I've got 2 children, I've got to earn a living. I really don't have the time to do this stuff. So there is a place in the world for the propagandists. There is a place in the world for people who are absolutely convinced that what they're saying is the answer to everything, even if the rest of us don't agree.
Okay. Now, I'm typing something to May read in the chat room. She was saying that she had a question for you, but then right after that, she said, I got to go do 3 right back dishes this time. So I'm like, why ask the question until she gets back? So I'm typing to her to let me know when she returns.
Sure. So, people are busy. People have got things in their life. And you look at the average person that has an encounter with the paranormal, whether you're talking about a ghost or a UFO or what, normally that's the only time they see it. I mean, I was talking to a guy here in southern England, down in Sussex, who saw a UFO, when was it, last autumn, about October, last year. But he isn't interested in the paranormal, he's not interested in flying saucers, he's got no interest in ghosts or cryptids, nothing, But he was walking to work early one morning, it was about 6:30 a.m., and as he was walking across the field, he saw a UFO come in, came down low. He reckons it was maybe 40, 50 feet across and about maybe 10 or 12 feet tall. Anyway, typical UFO. It was round, it was smooth, it was silvery. It made a humming noise as it came down. And it came down and it landed maybe 400 or 500 yards away from him, sat there for a few minutes, then took off and flew away. So, he didn't have an encounter with UFO aliens, nothing dramatic, nothing exciting. But that's the only encounter he's had with the paranormal. And he was saying to me, he said, I never thought I'd see anything like this. I was just walking to work, he said, I go down the same footpath every day, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year for the past 8 years, and all he's ever seen is a few birds and the grass growing. And then this one morning, he sees something extraordinary. And then since then, he hasn't seen anything at all. So, most people that encounter the paranormal, they're just regular guys, they're perfectly normal people, and they just come across something that is bizarre, and unexplained and absolutely peculiar, and they don't know what to make of it any more than the rest of us.
I hear you. Okay, while you was telling us about that, Mayreed came back to the computer, said, I can hear you, I'm just away from the computer, so I guess we'll go ahead and ask.
Yeah.
Her question was, what documentation is there on the 1977 Sting in Yorkshire?
On the 1977 what?
Sting. Or
Okay.
sighting, I'm sorry, sighting.
Okay. This is the... now, I'm not sure I put that in my book, because I put in this book the ones that I was able to get to the witness and talk to them, and I think go in... Hang on, let me just look, because I'm going to have to go back to my research notes if I didn't put it in the final manuscript. Just give me a minute here.
Okay. And while he's looking through that there, folks, once again, let me remind you that the call-in number, if you want to ask questions, is 832-632-7904, and his website is www.ruppertmatthews.com.
Okay.
And in fact, I promised her to paste that.
It didn't get in the final manuscript. I think she's talking about maybe the Bramham Moor sighting. This is when a UFO came down and it landed up on Bramham Moor, which is a very isolated rural area. It's up on the hills. I think probably the nearest village is maybe about 7 or 8 miles away, and it's beautiful scenery. People go walking there, but nobody actually lives up there. And what happened was that there was a chap up there who was just walking, because people like going for walking holidays and so on. And he saw this UFO come down onto Bramham Moor, and it landed maybe 300-400 yards away from him. And he crouched down to watch it, and he saw 2 figures come out of the UFO. They were about 4 feet tall. They were... They looked, he said they looked like children that were dressed in gymnastic outfits, that tight lycra sort of outfit. And he said they just sort of wandered around for a bit. They looked at plants, they picked a bit of heather, they picked a bit of grass, they just messed about for 5-10 minutes. And then suddenly one of them looked at him. Obviously they'd heard him or seen him. This one looked at him and pointed towards him, and that one and his companion then went back into the UFO, took off and flew away. So if that's the sighting she's talking about, which is up on Bramham Moor, I wasn't able to go and talk to the witness, which was unfortunate. But it was reported very widely in the press at the time. He gave a lot of good interviews. He gave very precise descriptions of what he'd seen. And what I thought was interesting was at the time he encountered it, he wasn't thinking about UFOs. He wasn't thinking about flying saucers or aliens or anything like that. When he saw this thing come down, he thought what he was seeing was some sort of top secret weapon, because our Royal Air Force, the British Air Force, has got a lot of bases up in northern England, because that's sort of faces out across the ocean, but if the Russians are going to send bombers in, that's where they'd be coming in. So we've got a lot of Air Force bases there. And this guy, just assumed what he was looking at was some sort of secret weapon that maybe the Air Force was testing out. Until he saw these figures come out of it, he said we're just like children. But he thought, that's a bit odd. What are children doing flying a secret weapon? That's very strange. So he watched it and it took off. And it wasn't until after he got back and he told his wife about it, and then it's reported in the local press, that anyone said, oh no, just a minute, you saw a UFO in aliens. And that's interesting, like I say, he hadn't thought that at all. He thought what he was seeing was, an absolute mechanical nuts and bolt object that landed. It was a real aircraft, real things came out of it. He was expecting a pilot or something, and he got these 2 things he thought were children. And it wasn't until sometime later that anyone sort of said, no, that's a UFO sighting. So if that's what she's talking about, that's pretty much what I know about the sighting up on Bramham Moor.
Okay. I'm pretty sure that's what she was probably asking about. If not, I'm pretty sure she would already pointed it out in the chat room. So you also say you had a history of hauntings in Yorkshire?
Of what's in Yorkshire?
Hauntings.
There's a lot. I mean, it's, if you like, it's ghosts that first got me interested in the paranormal. Because as a historian, if you like, a lot of ghost stories are history stories. You know, they've had people that lived in the past. So in Yorkshire, it's got a lot of hauntings going on. I mean, one of the most spectacular is up at Ruppert, which is a small town. I suppose it's got a population of about 1,000 people, something like that. But it's got a castle there, which is owned by the local lords, and that's been there for, I think, 900 years. It's quite a long time. And that's got that's got a very famous ghost. That's got a ghost of a lady in a long white dress, and she's seen pretty regularly. I mean, you know, for ghosts, she's seen once or twice a month, which is pretty good going for a ghost, certainly in this country. And every time she's seen, she does exactly the same thing. She's dressed in a long white dress. She walks down the stairs, and she starts to head as if she's going for the front door. And then she never gets to the front door because she vanishes. What's really annoying about this ghost is nobody knows who she is. She's been seen off and on for, certainly we got sightings going back to the 1880s, 1890s. But nobody knows who she is, and yet she is one of the most active ghosts we've got in Yorkshire.
Okay. That sounded very fascinating, too. Now, Mayreed wanted me to, thank you for answering the question for her. And that's
right.
I was also going to say, now, in Yorkshire, do y'all have your own version of the Bigfoot?
In Yorkshire, no. There are a lot of stories, if you go back 400 or 500 years, there were quite a lot of stories in England about what were known in this country as wild men or woodmen. They went by both of those names. And they really, you describing, again, maybe not a Bigfoot, it's more like a gorilla. So, it doesn't walk upright, it walks on all fours. Yes, it's covered in hair, but he's like a giant ape. It's not quite the same as Bigfoot, which is a lot more human-like in its habits and its movement. But you go back 400 or 500 years, there's a lot of reports of these wild men or these woodmen knocking about in England. And they're really difficult to pin down because obviously, written records from 500 years ago are a bit scarce. Some of them are copies of the original and so on. But some of them, they do sound like someone has actually encountered something they can't explain. I suppose that's the cautious way of putting it, isn't it? And there are all sorts of theories about what was going on. Some of them think that maybe these stories are about Neanderthals. That's the type of human that existed before modern humans. And here in Britain, here in Europe, we had Neanderthals knocking about until, I think, only about 20,000 years ago, fossils have been found. And so, maybe they were able to survive in remote areas, maybe they were able to survive in areas where modern humans, us, when we were looking at farming, we just settled on the good farming land, and maybe the Neanderthals managed to hang on and managed to survive in areas that were a bit more remote and weren't so good for farming. But with the descriptions that we have of these things, they're more ape-like than you're talking about with the Bigfoot, so they appear to be a different sort of animal.
Well, just out of my own curiosity, because I've read about people that claim to have seen blue extraterrestrials, or at least they believe they were extraterrestrial, and I know recently here in America I saw a news article that there's a genetic cause for some people to be blue from birth. So I'm wondering, has there been any kind of reports like that anywhere near Yorkshire?
Well, again, not in Yorkshire, but in England, certainly. There have been talks about differently coloured humans. What they tend to be is about children. The most famous one was about the green children at Ruppert in Suffolk, because this was very well documented, and scientists went and studied them and so on. And this was, I might get this wrong, but it was about 300 years ago. And these two children just wandered out of the woods and into a village in Suffolk, which is one of the other counties we've got here. And they were pale green. Their skin was pale green, their hair was pale green, everything about them was green. And they spoke a language to each other that no one could understand. They weren't talking English, they were talking some sort of foreign language. And they didn't know where they were, they looked lost, they looked confused. Anyway, the local villagers took these two children, aged about 8, 9, that sort of age, took them off to the local lord of the manor, who took them in to look after them. And these children, to start with, would only eat vegetables. They would only eat green things like cabbages and leeks and Brussels sprouts and things like that. And just gradually over time, these children started to learn English and started to eat other foods. And after about 2 or 3 years, the colour faded until they would, look like normal human beings. And when they learned to speak English, the story they told was that they had grown up in a village, that it was nice, that but what they said, there was one day they'd been out walking and that they'd followed some goats into a cave because they were trying to recover the lost goats, and they got lost in this cave, and then they emerged and found themselves at another village. And what they said particularly was that the village they had originally come from, not only was everybody there had green skin and that everybody there ate vegetables, what they said was that the sky was green, and that I think they said there were 2 moons, yeah? And then suddenly they turn up in England, and they can't make sense of it and so on. So, were they aliens? Were they mentally ill? Had they been transported here from somewhere else, but by someone? We don't know. The story was quite famous at the time, and the king that we had then sent a couple of scientists down there to interview them and research the story. And that's why we've got the records. But there are lots of stories like that. The Green Children of Ruppert is famous because it was properly investigated at the time. But there were lots of stories like that. Like there were green people, there were blue people, there were yellow people. And we just don't know, really. But there are quite a few accounts of them, yes.
Okay. Now, while we were learning about that, Meg Reed was asking me to, when I got the chance, ask you about the black cat of Exmoor.
Oh, yes. Yes. I went down to Exmoor summer before last, so that's getting on for 2 years ago now. That's very interesting. I spoke to several witnesses who had seen it, and the description and the talk about how it behaves and so on really comes down to the fact that what they've got there is a real flesh and blood animal. It's not an animal that's behaving in a paranormal way, if that makes sense. It's an animal that is behaving like a real puma or a real leopard would behave. The farmers down there for about the past 6 or 7 years have found sheep and goats that have quite obviously been killed and partially eaten by a big cat. The wounds on it and the paw marks in the mud around it and so on. It is quite clearly a big cat that's up there. So the question then becomes not so much what's going on, because quite clearly there is a big cat up on Exmoor, is what it is. Now Exmoor is a very unpopulated area. Nobody lives up on Exmoor. It covers maybe, 100 square miles. I mean, it's a big area of hills and moors, not many trees. You're mainly talking about scrub and bushes and grassland, okay? And it's high up and it gets very, very cold in the winter. So that's the sort of area you're dealing with. Nobody lives up there. People in the summer go up there on walking holidays, and in the winter there's just a few shepherds looking after sheep. Apart from that, there's no one up there. So it is perfectly conceivable that a big cat could be hunting up there. There's plenty of territory. There's plenty of food for it. There's plenty of cover in the form of bushes and scrub for it to hide in if it wants to. Most of the evidence for it comes from kills, from dead sheep, from dead goats, and so on. There have been a few sightings, a few shepherds who are up there claim to have seen it. There's maybe, I'm going to guess, maybe 30 sightings in all, but probably only about 6 or 7 have been at close range, maybe less than about 30 or 40 yards, and in good light conditions. So you're talking about, a small handful of sightings that are good quality, but they all agree about what they're seeing. What they're seeing is a big cat that is maybe about 4 or 5 feet long in the body, plus a tail that's another 2 or 3 feet long, and it's black. It is absolutely jet black. The fur and the coat and everything is pure black. So although nobody's caught it, all the eyewitness accounts seem to agree about what's going on up there. And one thing that over here in England we found particularly interesting was while all these reports were going on at Exmoor, about the beast of Exmoor as it was known here, a few reports were also coming out of another area which has got upland, which is fairly remote, and that's a place called Northumberland. And a chap one of the shepherds up there, actually shot the cat. His name was Ted Noble. He shot the cat, and he took the dead body down and exhibited it in the local town, took it to the zoo, and the people at the zoo photographed it. And, you can find the photos on the web. You type in Ted Noble and puma, you'll see the photos. And it was a puma, like you guys have over in America, up in the Rocky Mountains. A cougar. Is it cougar? Puma? What do you call it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And one of them was living, up on these moors and up on these hills, killing sheep and so on. And obviously that animal is not native to this country. The biggest thing we've got here is a fox, which is maybe about 2 feet long. Because this has been a heavily populated island for a long time, so we've killed all the wolves, we've killed all the bears. I think the last bear in England was about 400 years ago. So to have one of these big cats running around is really big news for us. And this chap, Ted Noble, he actually shot one. He actually got one. So the beast of Exmoor, this big black cat that's meant to be running around on Exmoor, is suddenly, it seems a lot more likely that somehow a black leopard or a black cougar or something got loose down there, and is having a very nice life, killing sheep and enjoying itself.
Okay. Now, May Reed was telling me that she's a Celtic witch and she works for the fairy folk and does a healing ritual to invoke the wee folk on Fridays. But she was wanting me to ask you about the fairy folk. She didn't say exactly what to ask you about them, but maybe you'll know what she wanted to know.
Oh, sure. Okay. There are a lot of different views on what's going on there. The little people, the wee people, the good people. There are lots of different names for this race of people. They are generally said to be about maybe 3 or 4 feet tall. They live in remote areas. Again, they like woods, they like moors, they like forests, they like places where humans don't go a lot. They also tend to like abandoned sites. So, like we've got a lot of stone circles or standing stones or Bronze Age barrows and burial mounds and so on. And again, the little people are meant to quite like those places. Opinion here amongst researchers is divided as to what's going on with the fairies. If you look at stories that come out of maybe the past 100, 150 years, the fairy stories you're getting are like fairy stories. They're like Cinderella, they're like Snow White, you have a fairy godmother, you have a fairy that can work magic and things like that, which seem to be, have a lot more in common with perhaps made-up stories than with real life. If you go back 200 years, 250 years, and you're looking at people who claim to have encountered the little people back then, The stories are quite different. The stories they seem to be talking about are about unexpected encounters with humanoid-type creatures that are, I'd say, maybe 3 feet tall, that live in remote areas. Sometimes they're said to have powers. Now, not quite magic like you get in, Cinderella and stuff, but that they can levitate off the ground, that they can make people freeze. I mean, there's one very well-known story from Cornwall about a lady who encountered the fairies when she was walking home from work one night. This is in about 1820, 1830. And she saw the fairies in a field, and stopped and looked over the hedge at them, and one of the fairies just pointed a finger at her, and she couldn't move for about half an hour. And the fairies just packed up and trotted off and went about their business, and she just could not for half an hour. So, there are different schools of thought about what's going on with the little people. Some researchers think that what you're dealing with here is just made-up stories, that there's nothing to it at all, that it's just, legends and myths and so on. Another school of thought thinks that it was a way in which people back then could rationalise strange things that happened to them, so that if you, what we would perhaps today call, that you had a stroke, or you passed out, but, you had various medical conditions, then they would describe it in terms of the little people. But if you had a stroke or you had an epileptic fit, they say, oh no, it was the little people, one of the fairies must have touched me and I had an epileptic fit. So it was, if you like, a convenient explanation for things that can be explained with the state of scientific and medical knowledge 200 years ago. But a third way of thinking about it, and if you like, much more radical, looks at the eyewitness accounts of the fairies and the eyewitness accounts of goblins and so on, and says that what people are actually describing is very, very similar to the way people describe aliens that come out of UFOs today, that they may be 3 feet tall, that they kidnap you, that they do experiments on you, that they paralyze you, and so on. And so the thinking is that, what you're talking about with the little people might be the same as what you're dealing with aliens from UFOs. And whether they're aliens or whether they're fairies, you take your pick. But I think anyone who spends any time looking at the little people has got to get past the whole fairy story business. All this business of having a fairy godmother and being Cinderella or Snow White. You've got to get past all of that. You've got to look at eyewitness accounts, people who say they have encountered the little people. And the accounts you get from them are quite different. The little people, they're not hostile to humans, but they're not very friendly. And they certainly have powers and abilities which are sort of magical-ish, if you like. So the reports that you're getting are of a type of entity, a humanoid entity that lives in rural areas, which doesn't like human beings interfering with whatever they're doing, and is quite capable of kidnapping people, of paralysing people, and of doing quite unpleasant things to people. But usually only if the people interfere. If you see one of the little people, and there are lots of accounts of people who say that they saw a fairy or a goblin or a leprechaun or whatever, they say, well, I just stood still and watched. And then, of course, the people don't interfere with the human, and they go about their own business and then disappear.
Well, that kind of reminds me, I was going to ask you also, the fairies don't, but do you have any, if you did research into ancient aliens, is there any kind of evidence around your area or the Yorkshire area that would lend any credence to the ancient astronaut theory?
That's a tricky question. It's one of those things. I think if you believed in the ancient aliens theory, there are some things which you would say, yeah, okay, that is evidence of it. But I think if you take a more detached view, it's difficult to find it. Certainly around here, other parts of the world, other parts of Europe, yes, there are. There's certainly examples of, humans having technology way ahead of the time. Ancient aliens, in this part of the world, the trouble with that is our written records really only go back maybe 1,300 years. Then we have the little blip when the Romans were here, which was about 2,000 years ago, for a couple of hundred years. But when you're talking about ancient aliens, you're really you're talking about maybe 3,000-4,000 years ago, and we just don't have written records here, and we don't have carvings. 4,000 years ago, this was not a very civilized country, and if ancient aliens were around bringing civilization to humans, they weren't doing it here.
Yeah, I kind of had to ask you that, though, because I've read about Tara Hill, which I think's not far from England, unless I'm mistaken, and that was supposedly one of Inky's religious centers. And I've read about the Tuatha De Danann, and I think that's not far from you in the Scotland or the Ireland area. So I thought maybe with all that going on, maybe some of it reached into where you were at. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure. There are a lot of the similar monuments about. And you're right, it has been used by some people to push this ancient alien thing. But, my point of view on that really is that, the evidence you've got on those sites is not necessarily for aliens. The evidence you've got there is for a large amount of effort, for a considerable degree of skill in stone carving and building work with stone. And, of course, the conventional history is saying that back then, people in this area were living in small villages, that, maybe the biggest political unit you'd have was maybe 1,000 people. And there was absolutely no way that they could all get together and build the sort of monuments that you're talking about. On the other hand, maybe the biggest political unit was 1,000 people. But if everybody shared the same religion, and under that religion they wanted to build a monument for some kind, maybe then the religious unit might have been a lot larger. Maybe the religious unit was 100,000 people. And then suddenly you're talking about reserves of manpower and degrees of skill in stonemasonry and so on, where those sorts of monuments are possible, and conceivably could have been built. So, I know where you're coming from. I know where those people are coming from. And some people would argue it's a valid point of view. Personally, I would rather believe that perhaps the historians and the archaeologists are wrong about how society was working there, and perhaps society was working on a much larger scale and could put together work gangs of several thousand men to go out and build something.
Well, I would have to say at this point, from my perspective, that evidently there was some kind of a technology that caveman didn't have, whether it was from a prior race that was more advanced before the Ice Age, or, extraterrestrial involvement, or who knows where it come from. It does seem like history's not telling the whole story, in other words.
Well, yeah, I'd go along with that, because there are several indications of, like you say, technology. You're meant to be living in maybe a new Stone Age era, and yet suddenly there's a bit of technology just doesn't fit. Now, whether the explanation for that is aliens, or whether the explanation is some sort of Atlantis civilization that has been wiped out earlier and humanity was trying to rebuild itself, or whether it's just that, there was one very clever bloke who managed to work things out. But there are certainly anomalies. And there are quite a few anomalies that are thrown up in the archaeological record where, you're meant to be dealing with a Stone Age pastoral community. And just suddenly you've got something that looks like an electronic battery, and it just doesn't make sense. So I think you're right. History isn't always right. History is always open to modification. History is always open to being rewritten. But we've got to be careful about, and, this is something that I try to do when I'm writing about the paranormal, is you've got to put the evidence first. You can't put the theory first. If you start putting the theory first, if someone's got the theory that there was an Atlantis civilization that was very advanced and was destroyed, and humanity tried to build itself afterwards. What you tend to do then is try and make the evidence fit the theory, and then you can get into trouble.
And that's already happening a lot today anyway.
Yeah, you've got to put the evidence first. You know, if you work with the evidence first, and it was Sherlock Holmes, I think, yes, it was Sherlock Holmes, who said, once you've eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however ridiculous, is the correct answer.
In fact, I believe Spock used that in one of the Star Trek movies.
Did he?
Yeah.
You know, I used to love Star Trek. That was on when I was a kid. And I just loved Scotty and Spock and all that, but I thought they were great.
Yeah, me too. That's why I memorized it, because I loved it so much I watched it a lot.
Oh, yeah.
But, yeah, listen, it's getting kind of late into the day, and I thought, since we've been talking about Mysterious Yorkshire for quite a while, that we could maybe talk a little bit about your work in Roswell. Now, you did most of your research from over there on that book, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It's that book, and you know, this is a great confession. You know, it's one of the trade we call secondary research. I did not actually go and talk to any of the witnesses. What I did was I read their accounts and I read the transcripts of interviews with them that other people had done. And the reason for that was that the book I did on Roswell was commissioned by a UK publisher, and we had a very tight deadline. They needed to get it into the book shops by a particular date because, you know, that was their contract. And I really didn't have enough time to go out to the States and do primary research, you know, actually talking to people. So unlike, you know, most of the books that I do, Mysterious Yorkshire, Haunted Kent, Ghosts of Berkshire, you know, which are based in this country, where I go and talk to the witnesses and actually pin things down. The Roswell book, I must confess, it was secondary. I just read interviews other people had done. So, sorry.
Well, yeah, there's still a lot of information out there about that, and I was thinking maybe, I don't know, I haven't read the book, that you might have been able to get enough information from reading the accounts to form some kind of hypothesis about what you thought might be going on with that.
Sure. I mean, the conclusion I came to was that, without doubt, and I think very few people would disagree with this, something crashed at Roswell. And I think pretty much every researcher who's looking into it does agree with that. Something there. And it's also fairly clear that the American Air Force moved in very quickly and that they sealed off the area and that they confiscated the wreckage that a couple of people had found. But beyond that, the big problem at Roswell was that the major investigation didn't happen until about 20 years later. And over the course of 20 years, of course, you know, people's memories get muddled, people's memories get faded. And one of the interesting things that I found when I was reading the transcripts of interviews was the number of people who, when they were describing what had happened and what they had seen, who were uncertain about the date. Okay, they were saying, well, yes, now, well, it was in the late 40s, you know, and they would try to place it in relation to things important in their life, when their grandmother had died, when they'd left school, when they'd got their first job. And so the impression I got was that you had a whole bunch of witnesses who were, and I have no doubt, you know, were giving perfectly true and valid accounts of what they had genuinely experienced, but was spread over maybe a period of 3 or 4 years. You know, one guy could remember it was definitely in July, but he couldn't remember what year. Somebody else would remember it was the summer that he left school, but couldn't remember exactly when in a 2 or 3 month period that he was talking about. And I think what has probably happened is that something crashed and something very unusual happened that the Air Force wanted to cover up. But a lot of the accounts, if you like, have become part of the Roswell legend, weren't talking about that particular incident. They were talking about things that happened maybe a year later or a year earlier, that happened a month later, a month earlier. So the impression I came to was that whatever had crashed there and whatever came down, I think undoubtedly something did, was not necessarily what the legend, if you like, says it was. I am unconvinced that it was an alien spaceship. I think that much more likely it was perhaps some sort of secret project that the Air Force was working on that maybe went off course or malfunctioned in some way. And that was the initial crash. And that was the initial incident that the two or three people who could be very specific about the date were talking about. They were talking about small fragments of wreckage. They were talking about pieces of very lightweight metal. They were talking, everything they were talking about was small. Something had been destroyed. Something had crashed and been destroyed. Then you look at the interviews that were taking place maybe 20, 25 years later, and those are the interviews where they start talking about an aircraft or a spacecraft having come down. They were the interviews that start talking about bodies and so on. My personal opinion is that what happened was in the later interviews, they're talking about maybe crashed aircraft or test crash dummies and stuff like that. Because if someone comes to you and says, can you remember 20 years ago, was there some sort of a crash here? And you think, oh, well, can't really remember. Oh, yes, there was that time. And I think you're talking about maybe 2 or 3 different incidents which have been put together. And when they're all put together in one lump, then they are very mysterious. And the only explanation maybe is that it was a spacecraft, maybe it was an alien UFO. But if you take the individual accounts separately, somebody who remembers a couple of dead bodies somewhere in the late 1940s, it could be any air crash. There are 3 or 4 documented air crashes in the late 1940s in the area that produced bodies. It's only if you try and pin that down to the original crash, when of course there wasn't a crashed aircraft, there was only this sort of wreckage. Then you start getting a mystery. But each individual interview in itself could be explained away. It's only when you put it all together it becomes a mystery. My personal view is that, without meaning to, without being dishonest, the people who were looking into it sort of assumed they were all dealing with one incident, when perhaps they were dealing with 3 or 4 different incidents which actually weren't anything particularly bizarre.
Okay. Well, I can understand where you're coming from on that, and, quite honestly, from what I've been able to gather on the whole story, nobody's really 100% sure on that at this here point,
Yeah, no, and I think this is why mysteries like Roswell, or in this country, that have been holding a ball, why they remain fascinating. Because nobody can explain them. There's enough evidence there to hint that there should be an explanation and to indicate you should be able to work out what it was, but there's not enough evidence to actually definitively prove one way or the other. Whereas if you've got something where there is just no evidence at all, and I'm thinking about, over in this country, there was a big UFO sighting at Berlin, which is in Wales. There's just not enough evidence one way or the other. So, it was a big news at the time. Everyone was interested. But, after 6 months, everyone forgot about it because there's just not enough evidence to keep it going. Whereas something like Roswell, there's enough evidence to indicate, to hint you should be able to get to the bottom of it. But there's never quite enough evidence to prove what was really going on. And that's what makes them so interesting. That's what keeps them in the headlines.
Well, just out of curiosity, we're just talking strict opinion here.
Yeah.
If you were to give an opinion, what would you say the odds are that we either now or have been visited by extraterrestrial life at any point in time?
Ooh, that is very, very difficult.
No, I mean, I was just curious.
My natural reaction is also on the side of caution. So my natural reaction is to say, some evidence, but there's not enough to convince me. So I would go that it's 70% that we haven't and 30% that we have.
Well,
Okay.
that's a good answer, actually. And, I was really just honestly curious about it. I mean, from my perspective, if I ask you that question, I'll get the answer I just got. If I asked Philip Coppins that, he'd probably flip those numbers over, or, you know what I'm saying? It depends really on who you're asking, in other words. But, hey, I just thought it was something to do for a little bit of fun and to, just be curious about. I didn't mean anything by it. I hope you didn't take anything by it.
No. I mean, it's a difficult question because, if you posed the question, let's say, if you'd asked the question slightly separately, if you had said, people who claim to have seen aliens, are they really seeing something, or are they just lying because they want to get into the press? Yeah? Then I would have flipped the answers over. I'd have said, no, I think 70% of them have genuinely encountered something they can't explain, and 30% of them are either mad or are making it up because they want to be famous. Yeah?
Right.
So whether the actual explanation is that the things they are seeing are aliens, I put the other way around, because, there are other explanations for what people encounter other than that they're aliens. Are you with me?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I would agree with you. There are other explanations, and sometimes they're not really what you want to hear.
Well, that's right. Where was it? It was in, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was in Cirencester, which is a town in southern England here, yeah? And it was quite a famous haunting about 3 years ago. The people who were walking across a field at night, there was a footpath that went from a railway station to a village where a lot of people live. So, a lot of people walking across this field. And a lot of people that come home from work and, got off the train and in the spring were walking across this field. And they reported seeing a ghost of a lady in a white dress, right? And a chap from the local newspaper was sent down there to interview people and then to go to the field, at the time the ghost was meant to appear. And he saw the ghost, and he took a photo of it, yeah? And when he got back, and they downloaded the digital photo and blew it up, although at normal size, the digital photo looked like a human figure in a sort of long white dress, blurry thing. When they blew it up, what they found was it was a big white goose. And when they went back there the next day, they found that this goose had built a nest. And what it was obviously doing was, when it saw human people coming into its field, it thought, are they after my eggs? I'd better wave my wings at them to make them go away. And that was what people were saying. So, once the first person had thought, I'm seeing a ghost, and had told his friends, then anybody who went into the field and saw something big and white and was flapping about would think it's a ghost. Yeah? Because that's what they were going to see.
Right.
And in this country, I'll say, that was quite a famous case about 3 or 4 years ago, where, 8, 9, 10 people really did see something, and they really did see something. They weren't dreaming it, they weren't making it up. They really did see this white object in a field at dusk. But it was in fact, it wasn't a ghost, it was a goose. And I think that's quite a good example to use, where a witness can genuinely give an accurate account of what they saw. They're not lying, they're not making it up, and yet at the same time, they are absolutely wrong about what they saw.
Right.
Yeah?
Well, it's just like ghosts. Not long ago, I was asked about getting a friend and going out to investigate a reported either demonology or ghost case. They wasn't sure what was going on. And personally, I wasn't able to make it because of my show, or I think it was my show if I remember correctly. But the guy that I sent out there had run some tests, and these people were talking about they were actually seeing, like shadow people or something, and that things were moving and, things of this nature. And when he gets there, he finds that there's extremely high EMF fields that he suspected is coming from the wall outlets. And he has them check it out, and they didn't have any more trouble. These people were really seeing what they were seeing, but the EMF fields coming out of the outlets was doing something to their what they were seeing, in other words, and they were manifesting things that, I don't want to say imagining, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's right. You know, they are honest witnesses who are genuinely reporting what they have actually encountered, but they're wrong. Yeah? I mean, carbon monoxide is another thing which, I mean, not now, but maybe 30 or 40 years ago, was responsible for quite a lot of sightings, because if you've got, old-fashioned central heating, what it sometimes did, if it was a gas-fired central heating system, would leak small amounts of carbon monoxide into the house. Now, it's not enough to be dangerous, but it is enough. If you're sleeping at night and you're close to the source of the carbon monoxide, it would actually give you oxygen deprivation, and that would be enough to cause you to hallucinate things. And like I say, 40, 50 years ago in this country, when central heating was first coming in and people weren't used to it and they didn't fit it properly, that accounts for quite a rash of sightings and so on. And then, when the central heating was repaired, the ghost went away. So, yeah, I think you're right. There were a lot of witness statements which, you don't have to say the witness is lying. You don't have to say the witness is making it up. But at the same time, when you're dealing with witness accounts, you must always bear in mind, look at what they describe. Don't think about how they explain it. If they come along and say, I've seen a UFO, I've seen a ghost, great. But look at what they actually describe. Look at what they actually encounter. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can explain what it is in rational terms. But, even once you've done that, of course, there were some cases where they say, I saw a UFO and, blow me down. They have,
Okay. Now, I'm also going to ask you, are you planning any new books coming out in the near future? I'm sorry. You carry on. The answer is yes, but not about the paranormal. I've just written a book about the history of a railway line here in England, which I doubt it's going to be of interest to your listeners. It was just a little branch line. It was about 30 miles long. And it was opened back in, I think, about the 1860s, and it was closed down in 1974. And it's just quite a nice story because, there's a bit of social history here in England. The lord of the manor wanted to have a railway line going through his villages so he could get his grain and his sheep and stuff like that, could transport them out to market easily. But the local people didn't want it because, of course, it was going to cause a lot of fuss and it was going to go through their villages. It's a nice little bit of social history that it really is very local to England. That's the next book I've got coming out. After that, I've got a contract to write a book about Jack the Ripper, which again is history, so it's not paranormal at all, but that's going to be interesting. There's a lot of people that have theories about who Jack the Ripper was.
Oh, I know, aren't there? I did a magazine article about Jack the Ripper about 3-4 years ago now. But, now I've got the chance to research a proper book. I've just started doing research on that. I've been up to Scotland Yard, our police headquarters in London, and they've got all the original documentation. They've got the notebooks that, the policeman who was first to get to the body, but, the notebook that he wrote when he found it and so on. And I've just started doing research. I'm really looking forward to that one.
Okay. Now, do you have any other events coming up? I don't know, workshops, lectures, book signings, conferences, or?
Well, again, they're all over here in England. I've got a book signing. That's in London in about 2 months' time. We've just had our big trade fair here, the London Book Fair, which is where all the publishing types get together. I did 3 television interviews, 1 radio interview, and a book signing. But that's like the big thing for this thing. If anyone's going to do anything like that, it's what you do. So I've got a book signing coming up in about 2 months' time in London. Yeah. But again, they're all over this side of the Atlantic, aren't they?
Okay. Well, do you have any last-minute thoughts to share with the listeners? What I'd say, if you're dealing with investigations into paranormal, don't let the skeptics pull you off. Okay? I reckon that I take a very open-minded view to anything paranormal. I'm prepared to look at any sort of evidence. I'm prepared to talk to any witness about anything. But I actually personally take quite a skeptical view. I think that if you're making
an extraordinary claim. You know, if you're claiming you've seen an alien from another planet, if you're claiming you've seen a ghost of someone who's been dead for 50 years, you need extraordinary evidence to back that up. So go out and collect it. Talk to the witnesses. Jot down what they say. Keep careful records. But don't let the skeptics put you off. Because there are several examples in history where the skeptics have been wrong. You know, we look at gorillas. We know gorillas. Gorillas are normal. You go back to as recently as, 1890, any reputable scientist, any expert on wildlife would have told you gorillas don't exist. It's just a legend of ignorant natives in Africa, and you can't believe a word they say. And yet, we now know gorillas do exist. So, get out there. Do your investigations into ghosts, into UFOs, into cryptids, whatever it is. You might be right, you might be wrong, but time will tell. So collect your evidence and ignore the skeptics.
Well, that's really interesting because they also said there were no hobbits, and we've now proven hobbits, too. You're right. And you know what? That's the first I heard about the gorillas. I used to go to the zoo as a kid. I would see gorillas. And, I would just say, assume that everybody's known them. They've always been in cages, and, it's old news, in other words.
Yeah. You know the Tarzan, the books and the films about Tarzan?
Yes.
Meant to be brought up by gorillas, yeah? When that book was first written, gorillas were just reckoned to be a legend. So it'd be like today, someone who wrote a book about, let's say, a kid who was abducted by aliens and was taken off to the planet Zarkon and was taught all sorts of clever things and came back to Earth and, had adventures. When Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote the book Tarzan about this kid who was kidnapped by gorillas and brought up in the jungle, nobody believed gorillas existed. So it was like science fiction. Yeah? And yet, now, of course, we know gorillas existed and people view Tarzan differently. But when those books were first written, it was like science fiction.
You know what? When I used to watch Tarzan, it was one of my favorite shows. And I had just automatically assumed that the part about not believing in apes was just made up for the movie, in other words. I had no idea that back then there was some kind of, debate going on or controversy going on.
No. Scientists
I was just a clueless kid.
No, scientists are very good at pretending they know everything, but they don't.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank you for coming on, and I also want to ask you before I forget to, is there anything that you'd like to tell to my listeners about that I might have forgot to ask about?
Oh, good heavens. No, that's a big open-ended question. No, I'm just going to leave it with, if you're looking into the paranormal, collect the evidence. That's the key. Because with evidence, you can convince people you're right. But with just like stories and opinions, you're never going to convince anyone. Collect the evidence.
Okay, then. Once again, everybody, I want to remind you that his website's www.ruppertmatthews.com, and I will be putting this here interview over at YouTube, along with his picture and mine, his link and my link, and it's going to be in my archive as well, with the entire show description, the show, everything that you need to know about him, and it's going to have links to his book on my side. I can't do that at YouTube, unfortunately. They might get a little mad at me. But, at Daily Motion and Media Cafe, I'm going to push this around the internet so to make sure everybody can get a whiff of it, so to speak. And I want to ask you guys to, please invite your friends to come out and check out the show. And want to thank you guys for attending and participating. I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could without a guest. And Ruppert, I got a few more things I'm going to wrap up on the show after I get you off the line. There's no point in, holding you up to tell them, share some links with them that I want to share with them, and that sort of thing. And who my next guest is. I don't think I want to tie up your time for personal stuff, in other words.
I know. I've got a girl I've got to put to bed. She's only 8 years old and it's her bedtime now. So here in England, we're getting on towards late evening. So thanks very much, and I'll sign off, okay?
Okay, and I hope that you'll be willing to come back on my show in the future.
Oh, sure. Sure, yeah, anytime. Just let me know.
Okay, look, you have a good one.
All right, cheerio then. Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, everybody. Now, I'm not going to be having a show Saturday, primarily because I'm going to my son's karate tournament. I've rescheduled that show for next Wednesday. However, I will be having a show before that, which is my usual Tuesday show. And Tuesday, I'm going to be talking to, well, let me get my place here, Earl Lee, and it's going to be about his book, From the Bodies of the Gods, and it's going to talk about cannibalism in the early church and other religions and, you know, psychedelics and stuff like that. And it should be interesting. And then next Wednesday, the next day at 1, we're going to have The Secret of Numbers with Willem de Swart, and I'm hoping to see everybody here for both of those shows. In the meantime, don't forget, in the upper right-hand corner of this page is the link to World UFO Today, and these people are recognizing, I want to say it's June or July 22nd. You're going to have to go to their site to check it out because my memory's bad. It's National UFO Day. And don't forget to click on my friend's link over there on the left-hand side of the menu. And on that next page, you're going to find links to Alien and UFO Community, Supernatural UFO, and United Paranormal International. These are either networks or forums where I'm a member, where I've been happy being a member there for some time. And they got great people. There's a great place to learn, a lot of activity, a lot of posting. If you guys want to meet some more people of like mind, I think those are 2 or 3 great places to check out. And don't forget also on the left-hand side is the link to my radio favorites. And these are shows the hosts that I know who's been on my show. And I've checked out their show that I'm really impressed with. And that's Gary's show, UKPN Radio, JimHarold.com, The Gralien Report with Micah Hanks. And by the way, Michael's going to be on my show again in the near future. And then Mark Hamill's show, Ohio Politics. Until next Wednesday, if you'll pardon the frog in my throat, I wish everybody well. I want to thank you for coming once again. And y'all have a good one. And I'm going to call it quits. Bye-bye.